I went outside today and I gotta be honest, the fresh air did wonders for me. The changing of the seasons, it's magical. Just go out there and take a nice deep breath in and smell that pleasant Florida air, that wonderful, unforgettable aroma that smells like 5 septic tanks all overflowing at once. And while I was outside today, I had an epiphany. I've been forgetting to do a lot of important shit. Not like basic stuff like hygiene, brushing my teeth, wiping my ass. No, something far more important. I'm talking about the moist meter. The moist meter is viewed as the only scientifically accurate opinions to ever exist, and I have a responsibility as the lead researcher of the moist meter to deliver high quality reviews of movies, TV shows, and games, but I've been slacking a little bit. And not on purpose. Stream keeps calling me out on it, and it just now hit me like, yeah, I've forgotten to moist meter a lot of really big shit that I did watch, such as Rings of Power. I did watch all of Rings of Power, by the way, but it was so painfully, mind-numbingly mid, I just completely forgot to moist meter it. So I thought today would be a good opportunity just to go through like a quick review of all of the big stuff I've watched recently that I never moist metered because I just forgot to. Now, since I already brought it up, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Let's talk about how mid Rings of Power was. And I'm being a little generous calling it mid because I thought it was bordering on pretty bad very often throughout the show. There was just glimmers of hope where I was like, damn, this had a lot of potential. But overall, I would say it just wasn't very good. I didn't hate it as much as most people seem to. And I think that's because I've never read Tolkien's work. I'm just a massive Lord of the Rings fan. I think the Lord of the Rings trilogy from Peter Jackson is the best trilogy ever made. And yes, I do put it above the original Star Wars trilogy. I truly think it is a timeless masterpiece. All three of those movies are absolutely beautiful. And I'd argue damn near perfect. And I also love a lot of the spin-offs that came from that universe in terms of like their games back in the PS2 era, even the old Xbox 360 games. Then you also have some more modern ones like Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. Like the Lord of the Rings series has given me a lot of media that I absolutely love. But it's also given us some stinkers like The Hobbit, the Hobbit trilogy. I don't think those were unwatchably bad, but they were significantly worse than Lord of the Rings. And I get that it wasn't like entirely Peter Jackson's fault. There's apparently a lot of drama surrounding the production of these films, so we just ended up with something less than stellar. But I do think Rings of Power is the worst big budget, big scale Lord of the Rings production we've received so far. Of course, there's worse Lord of the Rings media, such as like the old 80s Lord of the Rings show, which was an absolute abomination, as well as like some shovelware from back in the day on PlayStation. But overall, I do think Rings of Power just didn't do anything well. I don't know if it's because they're trying to set themselves up for later seasons, so they just played it very safe here, or what necessarily went wrong, but the show is just extremely boring. It doesn't feel like you're watching a $1 billion show. That's right, the show is a $1 billion production. It doesn't feel like that at all. At times, it feels like I'm watching a high school theatrical piece. For example, that now infamous scene from the show in Numenor where Galadriel imprisons 4 guards after they like unlock the cell, and she just fucking like Wing Chuns them real quick, like Dale from Detroit Urban Survival Training. Somehow like maneuvers around all of them, pushes them in the cell and locks it and walks away. Like it's super, super goofy many times throughout this show. When it's not supposed to be. It's not like self-aware silliness. It's like, oh, this is supposed to be badass. But it falls flat on its face. But that's not like the worst part, that's just a bad scene. I think overall the character writing just isn't very good. They make Galadriel very, very unlikable. I'm someone who's not familiar with that character outside of Lord of the Rings movies, so I don't really know the Tolkien accurate lore or anything. But even not knowing that, I didn't really like her because she was just so robotic almost. I didn't even feel like I was watching a character. I felt like I was watching an android read lines. And I'm not blaming the actress. I don't think it's like her fault, but the character was just written so poorly in a way where it didn't even feel natural. Like just always confrontational and standoffish with everybody for no reason. Even people that were there to just help her. She's like, oh, well, fuck you anyway. And it's just, I don't know. She was just like this broken record of have to find Sauron, have to kill him, must destroy darkness. And she's far from the only poorly written character in the show, but she was the one that stood out the most since she's really kind of like the focal point here. I wouldn't necessarily call her like the protagonist since there's multiple storylines that it follows throughout that all kind of converge in the overarching plot. But she did have probably the most screen time, so it was the one that really stood out. Overall, just the writing was poor. It just wasn't very good, unfortunately. And even though I didn't like her as a character, I liked when she fights. There were scenes where she fights that were pretty cool, such as when they finally do encounter orcs and she's on horseback doing some flashy shit. That was pretty cool, but there's very little of that happening in this show. There's very little of anything happening in this show, really. It's just really stale conversations between characters vomiting exposition into each other's mouths like a baby bird feeding their child. There's good moments. I think the overall best episode is episode 6 because it's just a full-blown battle that goes on for almost the entire duration of the episode, and it's well done. Like, they actually did that whole episode pretty well. I enjoyed that one thoroughly. But that's the only, like, great episode throughout the entire series. And I definitely need to mention this. I think the entire Harfoot storyline was miserable. Every time we'd go from something to the Harfoots, I'd just roll my eyes and just be like, yep, here it comes. Time to fucking engage in my own little battle here to try and stay awake watching the Harfoots for the next 30 minutes. Absolutely nothing interesting happens with the Harfoots. Until the very end, kind of. And even then, it's not because of the Harfoots. They just happen to be there to watch something interesting happen. Oh my god, I could not stand the entire Harfoot storyline. It felt like they just shoehorned all of that in there because they knew they needed some kind of Hobbit-adjacent, storyline. Since, Hobbits were so crucial to Lord of the Rings, and of course The Hobbit. It just felt like completely aimless, though, with all of the Harfoot stuff going on. A lot of my really big complaints are going to fall into spoilers, and I'm not going to be spoiling anything, so these were just some, general points that I thought the show kind of failed on. So just going to plug Rings of Power into the moist meter now. I'm going to give it a 45%. Just a little below average and mediocre. I didn't full on hate it or anything, but I certainly wouldn't say I overall enjoyed the journey here. So anyway, that's the quick and dirty of Rings of Power moist meter. Now let's move on to the next big one that I completely forgot to moist meter. That's gonna be Barbarian. Barbarian is a recent horror movie that came out that you probably haven't heard of. It flew under the radar, but everyone that saw it was giving it rave reviews. It had a fucking 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. Everyone I knew that had seen it was talking very highly of it, praising it as one of the best horror movies to come out in the last decade or so. So I went to see it, and I've got to say, I really enjoyed it. Barbarian turned out to be an extremely enjoyable horror movie. When it was goofy, I think it was self-aware goofiness, which really improved it overall. And I thought it was just a really unique take on the old haunted house trope. The basic rundown without spoilers is two people ended up booking the same Airbnb somehow by complete mistake, and the guy who's there before the girl is a little creepy, but the girl still decides to stay there because it's a weird part of town. It's late, so she crashes there for the night. The guy's also there. And then things start to get a little sinister as they start to get the feeling that there might be something a little off about this whole situation. And then it devolves into some truly bizarre stuff. I think this is all in the trailer that I can talk about, but there's an underground area to this house, and something a little bit more evil happens to be going on. And I actually thought they did it really well. They even bring in another character who's just an unlikable douchebag who's super silly, and he gets thrown into the mix here. I don't want to spoil shit about this movie because I think it's better to go in knowing nothing about it. But just know that it gets pretty brutal. It gets very silly sometimes, but it seems like it's always done in the self-aware sense of being silly. And I just really enjoyed it. So overall, I'd probably give Barbarian an 88%. It's an arbitrary number, but I toss this one out sometimes when I don't quite feel it's 90% A-worthy. So 88, I think, is just that nice middle ground because it's not quite like a horror classic, but it's a really fun one to kick back and just have some fun watching. The characters don't make stupid decisions in this film. They actually make pretty smart choices overall, except for a couple times. But the person who makes the worst decisions is the one you would expect to make the worst decisions because he's designed that way. So it's excusable when he does it. But yeah, Barbarian was actually good and quite the shock. The next piece of content that I forgot to moist meter is Scorn. Scorn is a game that's been in development for a long time now. I personally have been looking forward to the game for, I think, close to 6 years now, something like that. It was a game I was actively excited for a long time, but started to lose hope that it'd ever come out. And then it did. It came out last week, and it was very disappointing. I made a video called Scorn is Disappointing, and I mean that. I don't often get like really excited for games and follow them for a long time, but for Scorn I did. A truly unique atmosphere. All of the gameplay trailers and all of the presentation material over the years they'd showed, I thought looked great. I did think the gameplay looked a little lackluster when it came to like its actual gun mechanics and everything. It looked very, very basic, but nothing could have prepared me for what the game actually was when it came out. It really wasn't at all how it was advertised, where it looked like it was more focused on survival elements in the trailers and the gameplay. The game itself is actually just puzzles. Like, there's really no elements of survival in there at all. It's mainly just solving puzzles, and it's completely atmosphere driven. There's no actual narrative that they feed you. They just show you a setting, and you piece together the story through the clues in the world and come up with your own interpretation of what's going on, which I think could be cool. The ambiguity I usually do appreciate, but not when it's this obtuse, for lack of a better word. There is nothing really to go on for the majority of the game until the end. Most of the time you're just wandering around and seeing some like creepy, unnerving shit, but there's no real plot elements to it that you can really start piecing things together until the very end. So I just felt like it would have been better if there was some kind of structure to a narrative there, but there wasn't. And the gunplay is, without exaggeration, the worst gunplay I've experienced in the modern age. It is inexcusably bad. It would have been better if they just didn't even have the guns to begin with. I don't even know why they bothered. It is awful. Shooting in this game feels like shit. There's only 3 enemies in the entire game, and then 1 boss who's repeated 3 times. So there's not like there's a lot of enemy variety anyway. It's not like they cared about gameplay. I don't know why they even bothered with guns. Just keep it all puzzles, because the gameplay just made me want to bang my head against a wall. I also couldn't help but be underwhelmed with the length of the game. It took me a little over 4 hours to complete it, and that was with like some time of just wandering around aimlessly, and I accidentally overwrote my autosave and had to do an entire chapter over. So I bet if you just played this normally, like full focus, you could probably finish the game in like 2 hours, maybe 2.5 on your first playthrough. So it was really underwhelming overall. Now, I don't think it's like a necessarily terrible game or anything like that. I think the atmosphere is unmatched. Visually, it's fucking stunning. I also really like the eeriness to all of it. Like when there are cutscenes, they're gross. They're not afraid to be gross and unsettling. And I like that. I really do. This game had a lot of potential. I just feel like maybe they needed someone else to come in and do the gunplay for them if they really wanted the gunplay, or just focus more on unique puzzles and make it like a full puzzle game without this awful gunplay tacked on. Overall though, plugging Scorn into the moist meter, I'm going to be giving it a 60%. I wanted this game to be great, but at the end of the day, it was only okay. It was a game that I don't regret playing, but man, were there times where I was truly put off while playing it just because of how bad the gunplay was. And I was just kind of let down because I think I built the game up in my head on like, oh, it's going to have a really cool story, the atmosphere is going to be amazing, which it was. And the gunplay, while not being amazing, is going to be serviceable with some cool enemies that are going to be, it's going to be fun. I'm going to love it. But unfortunately, that just wasn't the full case. So now moving on to the next thing that I forgot to moist meter is the Cutty. Cutty is a horror movie that I'm sure none of you have heard of, but it was one that I was really excited for because it looked so bad. It's a Hulu original horror film that's basically about that whole Momo thing from a few years back, that like viral meme Momo, where it's like Momo asks you to punch yourself in the face. You gotta do it. They made a whole horror movie based off that called The Cutty. And it is as bad as you're expecting. But it's not fun bad. It is mind-numbingly boring bad, which is why I forgot to moist meter it. I thought it'd be fun stinky, and it wasn't. I had no fun at all. In a nutshell, the Cutty is this bad Halloween costume from Party City that travels through the cyberspace and hits your phone, and then he wants to hurt you with a knife. But people can't see him except for you when you're aware of the Cutty. And for some reason, the movie's really preachy about how detrimental cell phones are to the mental health of kids. Like, I think in the first 30 minutes, they drive home that message 1,000 times, like, technology is hurting our kids. They're not social. It's giving them self-esteem problems. Cell phones are bad. We don't like cell phones. Like, it just doesn't fucking let off the gas on that. Like, the Cutty, you know, he takes the back seat to the cell phone menace as a whole. And the movie's just bad. Like, there's not a lot of fun to be had there. It's just not enjoyable. Plugging Grim Cutty into the moist meter, I'm going to give it a 20%, and the only reason it's even that high is because of a couple really silly scenes that I did at least smile during because of how silly they were, but on the whole, I just didn't enjoy watching it. It wasn't fun bad. I think these are the last four things that I forgot to moist meter that I really should have. I don't think I've missed anything. I think everything else I have moist metered, so I just wanted to clear all this up, get all of these moist meter ratings out there so that way you can be informed on the quality of media out there. So yeah, anyway, that's about it. See ya.